Hello, everybody, and welcome to another session, another webinar from Power BI User Group Italy. I'm Riccardo, and here with me today we have Lorenzo and Daniel. And today we will see a session from Daniel that is called the Power F2. So we will talk about Fabric, and this is a very interesting session. You will see it very interesting session. Just a few words about us before we start. We are a user group, an Italian user group focused on business intelligence and data. Mainly, we produce content on Power BI, but we have content about all the Microsoft data stack. We try to organize both virtual and physical events with our community. We are on all the social channels, so you can find us on LinkedIn and Meetup if you want to see all our events. And then we have a very active community on Telegram, so a community that composed by people mainly speaking in Italian that ask for help, share insights, share ideas, and help each other. Then we have also YouTube channels. So many of you are probably connected with us today via YouTube, and you can find all the recordings of all our sessions there. Then we have also X, and we are an official Fabric community user group. For all the links, you can go directly to our link tree and you have all the informations. If you wish to be an active member of our community, you have all the socials that we have just presented, but you can also contribute with money, because we have a GoFundMe that we use mainly to support software that we use for delivering our content. So, for example, we are live on LinkedIn and YouTube through StreamYard, and we use this money to pay licenses. So if you want to contribute, this is a way. And we have to say thank you very much to all the people that have already contributed, because as you can see, for the 2026 we have already very close to our goal. So thank you very much to all the people that have contributed. We have another way to give your contribution, that is talking. So you can host a webinar like this. If you want to be like Daniel, you can just send a proposal to our call for speaker that is always open. We have already a bunch of sessions in queue, as you can see, 27 from 16 unique speakers. That is a huge success. And it doesn't matter if you are not a seasoned speaker. We are here for helping you. If you want to have your first public speaking, this could be a great place to start. So our community is open. You can organize an event. You can speak an event. It could be your first. It could be your first time. It's not a problem. You can contact us, and we will help you in this adventure. So, and with that, I hand over to Daniel with a great session on F2 capacity. Thank you very much, Daniel, for being with us.
Thanks for having me. Let me share the screen.
Yeah.
Which one was it? Oh. This one. Let me know if you can see my screen, which should be shared.
Let's see. Let's see. Okay, there you go.
Okay, great. So again, thanks for having me. This session is going to be about, I hope it's going to be an interesting topic. And if you are not using Fabric, or you haven't used Fabric so far, then I think it's going to give you an idea or an example how you can rely on the smallest capacity. Maybe this is where you want to start it. And a bit of a disclaimer, like to disclaimer first. Sorry if you can hear like kids' noises from the background. I had to come home quickly. One of them is a bit ill, so I had to go home. I have to get home, and if there is a bit of a kids' noises, then that's because of they are very active, even if they are a bit ill. And the second disclaimer is towards the this presentation. So this is the first time I'm presenting this session. This is some kind of like a work in progress. So your feedback is very much appreciated. Even after the session, during the session, feel free to ask questions. You can stop me, or you can reach out to me via LinkedIn or email and share your thoughts with me. Okay. And I will also do a bit of an introduction. So again, my name is Dániel Pátkos. I'm from Budapest, Hungary, where I have the good fortune and also the pleasure to work with my amazing colleagues at Visual Labs. I have 10 years of experience in data, and I've been mostly working with Power BI for the past 8 years now. Before, I've been focusing on other data products like or BI products like Tableau, Domo, Spotfire, but for the past 8 years, it's been mostly Power BI, the Azure data ecosystem, and obviously Fabric since its release. Other than LinkedIn, you can also check out my blog where I mostly share Power BI and Fabric-related stuff, and it has a slowly growing content, but growing. And apologies to anyone who is not speaking Italian, but as you can see, there is a little Italian heart next to you or on the slide, and that's because io parlo anche questa bellissima lingua italiana. Purtroppo ho anche paura e secondo me non ho abbastanza esperienze per fare questa presentazione in italiano, ma forse in quest'anno e nei prossimi mesi cerco di fare anche un'altra presentazione in italiano. Se volete potete anche scrivere i messaggi in italiano e possiamo avere la discussione in italiano dopo la sessione, cioè dopo questa presentazione, ma ora devo tornare a inglese. Thank you. And now that you know a bit about me, usually I would start this presentation or start any presentation with a set of questions, and I would try to understand your experience. And since I said that this session is more so I expect that this session is for those who are not using Fabric or not or haven't had too much experience with Fabric. These would be the questions I would use to gauge your experience with Fabric, with the different options like pay-as-you-go or reserve capacity, whether you have used F2 capacity so far, and if you have experience with ADF or Synapse or other Azure data products. If I'm not sure if it's possible, but if you can comment, if you can just write a quick comment whether you have experience with Fabric or F2 specifically, and maybe Lorenzo or someone can pass this knowledge to me during the session, then that would help. If not, I will just move towards the agenda, which looks like this. In the first couple of minutes, I intend to explain Fabric and F2 in general. Again, if you're not familiar with Fabric, this is going to be hopefully a quick and good overview. Then I will transition to right to the main topic, and this is how does it feel building on an F2 capacity? I'm going to explain a couple of issues or pitfalls we experienced, and just to give you my view or just to give you the experience you need to be prepared for if you decide to start a project on F2. After that, I'm going to give you like 2 examples when we actually introduced F2 solution or solutions built on F2. And oh yeah, thanks. I can see the answers. Thank you so much. So 2 examples when we introduced or implemented solutions built on F2. And also I will explain when F2, it cannot be an option anymore, and when is the time when you need to switch to different fabric capacity. We will have a few slides on the comparison between F2 and Azure services, or more like Fabric in general and Azure services, and I will also share a couple of architecture recommendations. So we have a good couple of topics. The main focus is going to be on points 3, 2, and 3, I believe. So again, if you have any questions, just feel free to ask, and feel free to interrupt me with those. But first, let's understand Fabric and F2 a bit more. We are going to start with Fabric. So I think a very common question I face, and especially the ones who are not familiar with Fabric, but also those who are familiar a bit with Fabric, is the thing that, okay, Microsoft introduced Fabric, but why did we need another data product? These are going to be slides shared by Microsoft and their opinion as well. So they have like a huge experience with data products, and not just them, but AWS as well, or Google as well. They serve like a huge number of clients, like from very small to huge companies. And based on this experience, based on the data they collected, and based on the data they collected and analyzed, they say that every analytics project has a very, very predictable pattern. So usually it starts with data integration. Every data project has a data integration part. You need to collect and move the data from source or sources and store it one central place, right? Once you have that data, or like all the data collected, you are going to need to analyze and transform this data. This is what they call data engineering. Obviously, this can be something very similar, like a Power Query script, and something like super complex, like something built on PySpark notebooks. And once that's ready, you are going to move the data away and store it somewhere else, which is more suitable for analysis. This is the data warehousing part. In most cases, you will also use real-time analytics and data science as well, if you want to implement those into your project. But what almost sure is going to follow is the business intelligence. So these are the foundational steps of every data project, analytical project, according to Microsoft. And if you wonder, Microsoft already has an answer for all of these, right? So they have ADFs for data integration, for example. You can use Spark for data engineering, or Synapse as well. And so Custo for real-time intelligence, so on. So until you arrive to Power BI. According to the brochures, this is still okay, but the evolution of these projects or these products was very fragmented, because the data integration parts, or the requirement, the need for data integration came way before real-time intelligence or data science was a thing. So we have very segmented products or solutions, and even Microsoft states that even if they have all the solutions, it's too complex, not just from like an end user, but also from like a developer point of view. There are too many products. The user experience is very, very different, like the interface, the way to interact, and so on. It's different. The business, they call it the business model, but whether it's built like monthly because it's a license you need to buy just in case of Power BI Pro or Premium per user, or it is based, or the bill is based on consumption, like in case of Synapse or ADF, That's very different, and that can be very confusing. Also, very deep expertise is needed for each of the products if you want to combine that, and they all require a steep learning curve. So this is what we had before Fabric. And now, after Fabric, they start to integrate everything into one solution. So move all the pieces, all the steps what we had before into under one umbrella. And finally, we have single sign-on. We have like a very similar UX and UI. If you ever used Power BI service, then Fabric's UR is going to be very, very familiar. So we have everything combined. Fabric is like a one solution for all of your problems, according to Microsoft, and it's delivered as a software as a service, which is important because, okay, you have this platform, but how is this platform actually delivered and paid for? So quickly understand the difference between like a platform as a service and a software as a service. Fabric is a software as a service, and you don't buy servers, you don't buy clusters, you don't buy runtimes, none of those. You buy capacity. And this is like a shared compute, which is always on, whether we are using it or not. And I think this is one of the key concepts for Fabric, and sometimes misunderstood, that that I'm going to explain shortly together with all these things. So now that we understand why Fabric exists, I think it's also important to know what exactly you pay for, when you pay for it, how much you can use at once, and if you use it, what actually uses it, so what consumes the capacity. In case of Fabric, you have two options, because, as I said earlier, the business model, so the way you were paying for things, was very confusing. They managed to simplify that somehow, but it can get still a headache to understand what you want to, what are you paying for and why you are paying for that. In case of Fabric, you have two options. You can go with a pay-as-you-go model, and you can go for a reserved capacity. In case of the pay-as-you-go model, you pay by minute. So every minute your Fabric capacity is active, then you are going to pay for it. And in case of a reserve capacity, you book this capacity from Microsoft for a year, and it is going to be like 40% cheaper compared to pay-as-you-go. But I think it's only viable, it only makes sense if you're actually using that much. So pay-as-you-go can be an option, especially I think if you for development or for test, when there is no need to constantly learning the capacity. And just to reiterate, you pay for it when it's running and not when you are using it. And I think it's a very, very important distinction you need to make. So there is a chance that you are not running anything. There are no calculations, nothing at all happening with your capacity. And at the end of the month, you realize that, oh, this bill is actually way higher than expected. And it's because you just forgot to turn off your capacity and you were not using that. So this is the distinction between pay-as-you-go and reserved. And again, even if you are not using any like actual compute, then you are going to pay for the minutes your capacity was turned on. And the next question, what you pay for. And these are called capacity units. So every time I refer to CUs, I'm going to refer to capacity units. These are the unit of measure representing a pool of compute power which is available to you. This compute power is used to run everything. It's used to run your queries, used to run your Power BI reports. It's used to run your Spark jobs. So everything what you run on Fabric is going to fight for the same amount of CU pools. And depending on the size of the capacity you actually pay for, the size of the capacity you pay for is going to determine the size of the pool your resources can fight for or can fight for. Yeah. And F2 is the smallest capacity. It has the least amount of CUs. I'm not going to get into like further technical details and show you the table, like the actual numbers, because I don't think that's necessary. The higher the capacity, the more amount of consume per seconds or CUs per seconds you are going to have. You have this predefined set of available CUs per minute, but it doesn't mean that sometimes you cannot go over this. I think I'm going to go through these slides relatively quickly, since I think this is important. It would be very nice to have some level of interaction. So I'm just going to explain this very, very quickly without knowing your background. So you have a predefined set of rules or CUs, and which you can use per second. But again, it doesn't mean that you cannot go over this sometimes. There are a few things you need to keep into mind while working with Fabric. There is something called bursting, which means that Fabric temporarily and automatically allows separate workloads to use more capacity than would be available, which means that like for a short period of time, you can use more resources than you would be like that is available on paper based on the capacity. But this is the plus. Oh, great! So I can do like more resource intensive jobs, right? Yes, but obviously this has like a side effect. Then sometimes you need to pay for that, and not just in terms of money, but also in terms of like compute capacity. So after there is like a bursting, then this bursting has to be smoothed. So if there is like a calmer period of time, Fabric is going to like smooth these reuse resources over time. And if you use too many resources, then you might end up with throttling. So Fabric saying that, hey, you use too many resources, and now it's time to rest or pay for a higher capacity. And these things are going to be interesting for us from an F2 point of view, because you might run into bursting relatively quickly and smoothing as well, and especially throttling if there are multiple workloads running, then you might get denied. So like your next refresh might not be run because you already ran too much. You already used too many resources. Okay. Yes. So Alessandro asked the question whether it's possible to automatically or programmatically turn off the capacity. Yes, I'm going to talk about this part a bit later at the end of the presentation, when during the part like recommended like architectural recommendations. Thanks for the question. Okay, and I think this is all what you need to know related to Fabric. You have available CUs. F2 is the smaller one, and let's see how it looks like in action when you actually try to develop something on that. So it's a funny thing, because theoretically you can write a super long code, or you can open and write codes in as many notebooks as you want in Fabric. There is no limitation. You can create an endless amount of data pipelines as well. The important thing is that you cannot run those simultaneously, or you cannot run those at all if those require too many resources. If you want to run like multiple of billions of rows, I'm not sure if you can. Okay, you might start, but you are not going to finish the job. So keeping all this in mind, we started developing on F2 as well, because that was a requirement, and we also wanted to experiment with this. The following few things I'm going to explain, I think are super important. And if you understand these things, or you are prepared for these things, then you will avoid like 80% of the problems people can run into by developing on F2. And the first thing is, I'm going to call this like dev versus prod capacity paradox. This is what is usually the situation is. So in general, when working with Fabric, it is considered best practice to use separate capacities for dev and prod. As I said, you can use a pay-as-you-go model for for development and test, for example, and then a reserve capacity for production. And since usually you won't need the same amount of resources, because usually you develop like your development is not as continuous as your production, it's okay to have a smaller capacity. So if you were to select a higher capacity, like an F16, then the usual recommendation is to use a smaller capacity for dev and the larger for prod. On paper, this may make complete sense, but based on our experience, the situation was the exact opposite, especially during the implementation phase. So before go live with this solution, we actually had to use F4, or like a higher capacity for development, and use a lower the F2 capacity for production. So this was one case, and the other case we used F4 for development, and then after go live we scaled that back to F2. And I think first it sounds like a paradox, or like not very intuitive, but if you think about how development actually looks like, then I think it's going to make sense. So while you are developing, you write code, you run it, you rerun it, you realize that you need something to do. You debug your code, you test only a smart part of your code, which works, maybe on like a small amount of data, but then when you scale up the data, you realize that it's not enough. I mean, it's not a good solution. So it's like a back and forth. You open multiple notebooks or multiple pipelines. You cancel that execution, you rerun the other execution. So all in all, dev, usually it's very noisy. And also it is unpredictable in terms of like resource requirements, at least before the implementation phase. And from a Fabric point of view, you are using a lot of CUs, and it's not necessarily because the final solution is going to use a lot of CUs, a lot of resources, but because they're constantly experimenting. And if you have multiple developers working on the same project, especially if you have a vibe coders, I think F2 is definitely not for vibe coders, because they can deplete the resources super quickly. But if you have multiple developers, or if you want to develop on your own on multiple notebooks simultaneously, then you will run into this issue that there is not enough capacity and you need to wait. And on the other hand, production is usually very reliable, it's boring, so it's like scheduled tasks, it do what exactly it's supposed to do and then stops. So I think it's easy to understand why the resource requirements for Ricardo actually has like a very good point. So yeah, you don't if you use trial, then it can also be very surprising. So it's easy to understand why it's a paradox, but you need a higher capacity for dev compared to production. And the next thing I'm going to show is why it's important, why this is especially important if there are multiple developers working on the same project. And this is what happened to us. And with F2, this was a surprise which we haven't experienced before. other capacities. And it's important to understand that a concept is called concurrency, so which basically means that each capacity, doesn't matter if F2 or F64 or anything, so each capacity lets you run a different number of jobs simultaneously, so that there are concurrent workloads. And obviously, the bigger the capacity, the higher the number of concurrent jobs you can run. In case of F2, this is going to be a very small, like a very, very small number. And what can be also surprising, that concurrency is not shared by workspace or per user, it's shared by the entire capacity. So it doesn't matter how many workspaces are tied to your capacity, and it also doesn't matter how many pipelines, notebooks, Power BI reports are sitting on these workspaces. They are all going to fight for the same amount of resources, and you can run out of resources very, very quickly. There are ways to mitigate that. So what the scenario you will face is that one of you start the development, opens a notebook, start writing code, start a Spark session, start writing code, and when the second developer wakes up and joins the development, that person cannot start a new Spark session, and this is completely normal. And if you go to the workspace settings of Cell Workspace, under data engineering and Spark sessions, you will see this. And this is this is why you would assume that like the default settings are for like assumes like that you have a larger capacity. This will help you to handle like more resource intensive jobs. So the auto scale and the dynamic allocator executors means that if you have like a more resource intensive job, Fabric is automatically going to like very generously automate allocating more compute power to that specific job. So it's going to be run faster, which is super helpful if you have the available resources. But on F2, this means that basically only there is only one notebook you can run. So what you can do and try to overcome this issue is set these back to 1, so like to the minimum settings, which will mean that your Spark session will get like less compute and probably will run slower, but you will have the chance at least to run a few, I would say 2 to 3 notebooks instead of one heavier one. And during development, that's very important. But again, sometimes this is not enough. Sometimes you need to scale up your capacity to F4, for example, when you have more compute power and you have more space for experimentation. Keep in mind, this is not going to increase the total capacity, the total Fabric capacity. I would say that it just like slices your already small F2 capacity in smaller pieces, and you can make sure that there is no one notebook which monopolizes everything. But if there is like one notebook or multiple notebooks with like heavy resource need, then you will end up you will most probably end up with like throttling, which I explained, that Fabric is going to say that, sorry, there are not enough CUs, and you already used your you already used your resources or the generosity of Fabric to bursting. So you need to wait until the cool down period ends. Yeah, this is one way how you can be sure that multiple developers can work on the same F2 capacity. The other things what you might need to keep in mind is that by default, the Spark sessions are not terminated when the notebook is closed. So even if I click on the X and close the notebook, if the notebook was running, then the Spark selection in the background is still active, which means it active for a couple of minutes, which by default can be useful, but it means that it uses like your precious resources. And we faced this multiple times, that you cannot start a new Spark session until you stopped your previous one. You can tackle it like two ways. The first is very annoying. It's a pain, but you can get used to that. Is once you finish the development in said notebook, you just click on the stop button and stop the session. And the other thing, which is more straightforward, I think, is the monitor page on notebook. The monitor page in Fabric. And I think if you are using a smaller capacity, then this is a page you will get familiar with like very, very soon. This is where you can track all your running jobs. So you can just cancel a process here in the monitor page. So yeah, I think if there are multiple developers working on the same thing, these things what you need to do. What you need to do. For example, we use this solution, like the set auto scale and the other things to minimum. Even if we have like a CI/CD solution deploying, like automatically deploying workspaces linked to feature branches, all the workspaces which can use notebooks based on the definition. So these workspaces are going to be scaled down back to the minimum. So you don't have to worry about that when creating the workspace. No, after the automation created the workspace, you don't have to go and manually change this down. Yeah. And the last thing, I think this is more like a user's perspective. And this is, you are going to face this if you run your Power BI reports on the Fabric capacity. It's important to understand how Fabric handles the different operations. There are the so-called interactive operations, and there are the background operations. Interactive operations are all the operations, or the kind of actions people expect to be fast and also like real-time and responsive, because they happen in front of the users. These can be opening a Power BI report, selecting a slicer on the Power BI report, running a script in SSMS. So every time when you actually expect the result immediately. And then there are background operations, which are like usually slower jobs. Refresh a semantic model, refresh a data pipeline, run a scheduled job. These are things when users are not going to look at the screen, most probably, while it's running and waiting until it's finished. So these can run in the background. The issue, even if there are two types of jobs, again, these two are going to fight for the same set of resources. Fabric tries to handle these in a way, but there is a chance that Power BI reports, which were completely okay yesterday, are slow now, and users start to complain that, hey, this is slow. Yesterday everything was okay. What happened? And usually what happened is that there was just like a scheduled workflow running in the background. And even if users are not aware of that, it can have a painful effect on the Power BI report. That's why I strongly recommend, and this is just one of the reasons, I recommend splitting the Fabric and Power BI items into separate workspaces, and not just workspaces, but keep the Fabric items related to a workspace tied to a Fabric capacity, and keep your Power BI related items on the Power BI workspace. Since F2 requires a Power BI Pro license to check the reports, then you still, you are going to need Power BI Pro anyway. And I don't think that either direct lake or direct query connections are like long-term viable on F2. So I would strongly recommend an import mode. And if you are using import, then it's completely fine. So if you use import mode and you import the data into your semantic model, you can also turn off your capacity since the data is imported into your semantic model on your Power BI Pro workspace. Your user can interact with that, can check that. They cannot refresh that because the source is not available, but at least they have a report, and their interaction is not going to have a detrimental effect on the way Fabric handles all the other items. So data refreshes and all the other Fabric stuff. Yeah. And I think these are the main takeaways I can share based on our experience so far. And now I'm going to explain 2 use cases and show you that working with F2 can be a pain, as I explained, but it's not that much of a pain, and then it can be actually a viable solution. So this one is going to be a smaller company. It's a local FMCG company. It has like 25 million euros yearly revenue, and they have a legacy ERP system, and they wanted to have a Power BI reports on procurement and client and product performance. When we were thinking on the solution, we have 2 things in mind, or the classic Azure infrastructure, or maybe move it to Fabric. And while we were discussing, someone also mentioned Power BI Premium per user, which when I tell the monthly cost later, you will realize that, yeah, it can be a viable solution or like alternative, but I think that Fabric, especially F2, it's completely enough for that. So the requirement is to have these reports daily refresh, so like once a day at the beginning of the day. Due to the way they operate, they don't need like real-time data, and every time it handles like 15 to 20k rows in total. The facts table are 2 to 3 million like long, so these are not like too big. There are 4 input tables in total. We split those up, and there is like data cleansing, transformations, calculations, CDC, so change data capture is implemented. They finally have like a view on historical data. They can also go time travel if they want. So everything happens in under 10 to 15 minutes a day. Again, it happens early in the morning, and I think it was a super successful story. They use obviously Power BI Pro for reporting, and that's enough, and import. So it was a super successful story from our end because we managed to deliver the projects faster, because I think one of the like benefits of Fabric is that it's easier to run raw code or code first solutions. So you don't have to rely on just on ADF pipelines. I'm not sure if anyone tried to run Python code in Azure Functions, or have like a Docker and run code there, but that can be a pain. And also the whole thing costs less than 30 euros a month for this company. So while you can compare the 24 euros as a premium per user license, I think they get just like way more. If they want, they can extend that. The capacity is nowhere to be close to be used, so we still can add more data, more transformation, more reports if they want. So I think, again, this is like one good example for a small company. I think that Fabric F2 is a no-brainer. We haven't really had to separate the dev and prod in this scenario. I mean, in terms of capacity, because the data was so like the data and the requirements were not that complex that we would have to do that. Okay, the other one, this one is like a bigger company, and to all fairness, right now they run on F4. Yeah. So they run on F4 now because after go live and the implementation, the requirements just grew, and we decided to move for cost considerations to a higher capacity. But the initial one was on F2. As you can see, this is like a bigger company. They operate in almost like 70 countries. They have 150 million, more than 150 million yearly revenue. They have multiple legacy ERP system, and they also have Dynamics 365 Financial Operation, which is one of the source system. We connected that with Synapse Link to Fabric, and not with Synapse, not with Fabric Link. And what they wanted to have is like Power BI reports, of course, but also like one central place to handle all the ERP related data. And they run 3 hourly refreshes, a couple of thousand of rows per refresh. The source is almost 100 bronze table coming from financial operations. I'm not sure who's familiar with that, but F&O tables are usually like huge, like 200-ish plus columns. And we do the same set of transformations. We end up with 8 goal tables. It's like a complete Medallion architecture. It's handled by Spark. And right now, this consumes like 70% of the F4 capacity, but initially the F2 reserve was more than enough. Obviously, we had to separate dev and prod because, as I explained earlier. So based on these two, I hope you can see the scale of the size of the companies and also the size of the data can have. And I think that F2 can be a perfectly fine if there are like predictable and scheduled workflows. The concurrency number is low, or there is no concurrency. It's batch oriented, so obviously it's not going to work with like real time. This is another work you need to do as a consultant that understand the need, whether there is real need for real time or not. And I think an additional piece that which is up to you, and it's like, and you will also understand that once you have the production implemented and it's running for a while, so you can analyze the data. So you actually might end paying less for a higher capacity for the same job if you can actually use parallel processing and finish the work earlier, or like sooner, and not just proportionally scale up. Or not just proportionally finish faster compared to F2. So even if I say that F2 is an option, there is a chance that you will actually pay less with F4 or F8. There are calculations on the web or Reddit, so you can, if you're interested, just check out those. Because if you can actually use the parallelism, then it can be cheaper as well. Okay. Okay, and yeah, let's see when it's not enough. I think it's not going to be a surprise that if you need more frequency refreshes, if you have more data, it's a good question, how much more data, because this is something I cannot answer you right now. But if you need more frequent refreshes, or the reports are in Fabric, then F2 is not going to be enough. And yes, okay. So Alessandro also asked if the Fabric capacity monitoring report is enough. to check and plan ahead, I think it's enough, especially combined with the how is it called? I will get back to this. Hope I will remember the name. There are two apps. One of those is the capacity consumption. The other one is the other, and those two combined are very, very helpful. Thanks for the questions. And I have a quick anecdote here to share. So when F2 is not enough, and it's possible that you need more frequent refreshes or more data or reports in Fabric, as I said, and you need to move to a higher capacity, or which are like very objective things. However, I think if you have bad design, then a higher capacity is not going to solve a bad design issue. We had a case when we just had to just move something to Fabric. It was a semantic model. It was working fine in Power BI Pro workspace, and it wasn't large in terms of data volumes, like a couple of hundreds of thousands of rows, so not even millions of rows. But the issue was that it wasn't following best practices. And again, it's supposed to be just a quick project, and it turned out that it turned out to be a problem like very quickly. It just ran out of memory during refresh on F2, on F4, on F8. We had to scale it up to F16 just to be able to refresh one semantic model, which was completely fine running on Power BI Pro. I think it's very interesting, and it's something just to keep in mind that bad design or bad practices can be mitigated by a higher capacity, but it's not necessarily like, okay, I just need to double the size of my capacity. We actually had to quadruple the size, which in terms of money, it's a huge it's huge difference. Okay. Yeah. So let's compare F2 versus other like Azure services. And I think it's going to be more like a preference. This architecture, I think it's a very like very high level architecture. Let's say you have a data source. Let's say this is like on-prem as well. You have your Azure tenant. You use ADF. You can use Synapse. It's that big of a client, but if you are interested in F2, you won't really need. You are not going to need the Synapse for those kind of projects. So you use ADF. You ingest in Azure. What's that? Azure Data Lake Storage, and then you run stored procedures, for example, and you have your SQL Server as well, and you have your Power BI visualizing the data. So I think, again, it's not going to be F2 specific, but from my experience, Fabric billing is still easier to explain. The unified UX and UI is a huge advantage, and even for you, so not as a developer. And I think for smaller like code first or pro code projects is a no-brainer. You are not going to use Synapse because it's expensive, and running code like Python or running Python on Azure function is a pain, based on my experience. So it can be a solution until the point you need like severe or more complex network related elements from the Azure infrastructure. These are still unannounced or missing or announced, but not even in preview. If you need a private endpoint to connect to something, to connect to resources, to connect to an on-prem database, then again, it's not F2 specific, but Fabric is not going to cut it. You need to rely on Azure services. So based on the scale of the project, I think F2 is better than the infrastructure I showed, because just to set this up, just to manage this, it takes more time and resources than to do the same thing in Fabric. Okay, and to close this off, I'm going to, I think I have 2 examples, like recommendations. The one is for, this one is for pay-as-you-go model, as someone, Alessandro, asked whether it's possible to turn it off and on automatically. So what I would do, and what I recommend, I also have a blog post, like a very detailed blog post about this. Instead of like scheduling your pay-as-you-go capacity and turn this on and off, which you can do, you can use a logic app, which triggers, you can schedule the logic app, and this logic app can check whether the capacity is running or not. If it's not running, then it can start the capacity. Once the capacity is started, it can trigger your data pipeline, which can have like notebooks and everything is included. You can also refresh the semantic model and use import mode, which is stored on the Power BI Pro workspace. And once it's ready, you can trigger another logic app through the an open API, so to an endpoint, an open endpoint. And once that's triggered, it will pause the capacity. I think it's super simple, especially if you have the skeleton of the code, which again, I can provide you with that. It's easy to set up and easy to have like a very cost-efficient way to operate, but also make sure that everything what you need is refreshed. The other thing what I mentioned is, definitely split Power BI Pro and Fabric items into different workspaces. Don't use your Fabric CUs with all your your Power BI items. But something you don't necessarily, you don't want to forget is not F2 specific, but if you're using Fabric and you are using an automation I just explained earlier, then you need to refresh the SQL metadata endpoint if your data is in the lakehouse, because you can run your pipelines, your data is ingested in the lakehouse, for example, but the way Fabric reads the data, handles data refreshes, sometimes it's not straightforward. So even if your notebook is finished and the data is already in the lakehouse, you can, on the UI, you can check it and it is on the lakehouse. But if you want to refresh the data, the semantic model connected to that lakehouse, the data is not going to be in the semantic model after refresh. So you specifically have to trigger an API endpoint and refresh the metadata of the lakehouse. It's just one additional code into your notebook. You can just add that or trigger a separate notebook with that. And finally, whether you should use pro code or like low code, no code solutions, I think before FabCon Europe, like the 2025, to me, this was a no-brainer, because the data flow, for example, the data flow Gen 2 was like 12 to 16 times more resource intensive for the same operation compared to a notebook. But now they changed that drastically. So I don't have like a clear answer right now. I will still usually prefer pro code solutions, because those still consume less, since the UI, since you don't have to pay for the interactive workload or interactive operations, or you need to pay less. But this is something you need to experiment with. And this, again, this might not be related to F2 at all. Okay. Thank you all. I think this is a summary. I think I already explained or like repeated this a couple of times. I think the most important thing is that it's not the amount of data, but the frequency you want to see your data refreshed in your Fabric data warehouse or lakehouse. If it's every 10 minutes, F2 is out of the question. If it's okay to run like batch loads, and when you can rely on bursting and you have like quiet time after that, and you need to run only like once, twice, 8 times a day, as I explained earlier in the example, I think it can be a viable solution. And what's also important, that you need to be disciplined. So since there is only just a very limited amount of resources you can use, you cannot use best practices or designs, because you are going to pay for it, like Visual pay for it. And that's all. Thank you so much for your attention. It's time for Q&A. Again, feel free to connect me or follow me here, and your feedback is very much appreciated in any way or in any form.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Very interesting session. And while we wait for participant for other question in the chat, I have one. So if I can go with my question, this is a very interesting session, and I wish I would attended it months ago, before jumping into the project that was exactly on F2. So I feel a little bit at home seeing your session. I have a question about the kind of notebooks that you run in your projects. I know that we can run both Spark and Python notebooks that behind the scenes are different. So they run on different cluster behind the scenes. So if you have any experience on that, or any thoughts on that, and if you tried different patterns and you elaborate the best practice according to F2 capacity.
I think that very much depends on the volume of data and the type of operations. I'm going to share. Wait, how can I join the chat? There is one guy. He's called Atte Sukari. He's a Finnish guy, and he has a session especially on this topic, when and whether you should rely on Python or PySpark notebooks. And wait, I think I need to authenticate myself. I will try to send his LinkedIn profile to the chat.
Mm-hmm.
And you can check his profile, and also I think his session is available, or should be available, at least the slides. So you can check that. It's a complex topic. We run, so to answer your questions, we only run PySpark notebooks because we work with data tables, and you cannot write Python notebooks if you are getting data out of data, a data lake. So that's the reason. But other than that, it depends on the size of the data. Also, again, whether you can use multiprocessing or parallelism. And this is what I can say to that. So Alessandro said that all the customers said, I told her, are super scared about Fabric pricing because the Microsoft pricing page doesn't make it clear at all. Yes, exactly. And also, so if you say that, hey, you are during development, obviously you are going to need more uptime. But even during development, if you say that you develop like 5 times a day, like 5 days a week, like 8 hours a day, or even 10 hours a day, if you calculate that and add that and calculate the cost, like the monthly estimated cost, it's not going to be like half of the cost what it's stated on the Fabric pricing page. And once you finalize your work and you have something in production, I think pay-as-you-go can be a very viable solution for production, and not just for the super small company. Like, it's not a small company, like a company with like smaller needs, but even like for like a larger one. If the refresh takes like half an hour, like an hour, and you need to refresh it like just a couple of times a day, your costs are not going to be like too high at all. Yeah. No, I think pay-as-you-go, it's not just... wait, Michael, I'm not sure if you're referring to your previous post or my previous comment or what I said, but I think pay-as-you-go is not suitable for F2, but it's suitable for like all other capacities as well, until a certain point. Obviously, until, I don't know, if you need like F64 or maybe F32 as well, then you might go with a reserved capacity. But after that, it can be a solution. And yeah, thanks for what you shared. I don't have experience with that.
Just one comment on the shutdown of a capacity. That is something that was pretty confusing. Maybe I wasn't aware of that, and the first time I saw it, I'm pretty sure Microsoft changed it at some point. If you have some spikes in your capacity and you decide to shut down the capacity, you are not going to the smoothing process, and you end up paying all the overages at one shot. So it's something that you must be aware, and you just have to be very, very clear when you do your capacity planning, because if you try to run an F64 workload on an F2, leveraging with all the overages, and then you do, okay, I just shut down and I'm done, you will go to pay it back in just one shot. So
that's
it's something that is not clear in the documentation, so you have to be aware before putting something into production and paying for it.
And thanks for adding that. Yeah, that's super important. That this is also one way to trick the system, so which can be used in F2. So if you run out of CUs and you don't want to wait, you can just stop the capacity, restart that. But keep in mind that it's not like Microsoft will ask you the bill. So like you need to pay for what you've used. It's not like you can get away with that. So yeah, it's important. So
great. I see no further question on LinkedIn or YouTube. I would say thank you very much, Daniel, for being with us. It's been a very interesting session, and it's been a pleasure having you. I hope to see you again in another event. So if you have any other session, you just put in the session I called for speaker. And for all the people that, for people that attended it, thank you very much. And stay tuned on our socials, because we are going to post the next event, and you will see that we will have other great speaker, great session here at the Power BI User Group Italy. So thank you very much, and see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you again for having me. Bye.
Bye.